My name is Gulnara. I'm from Uzbekistan, and what I'm about to share with you isn't just about pain and loss, but about how God reaches even the darkest corners of the earth with his light. It's a story of faith tested, but also of a love that no regime, no matter how oppressive, can extinguish. It all began in Samarkand, my hometown, a place with a rich history, known for its beauty, but which, in my eyes, had become a prison in disguise. There, every mosque seemed more like a checkpoint than a house of prayer. I grew up in a typical Uzbek family, and my father was a simple employee of the Ministry of Agriculture. We lived in a mud house, just like the others in the neighborhood, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the authorities, even more so. But within that house lay a secret. My grandmother, Bibaba, carried a hidden faith, one that could have cost her life. She learned of the gospel through Russian Christians deported during Soviet times. I was just a girl, but I clearly remember the nights she would sit beside me and, in a low voice, tell me stories of a different God. She would say, "There is a love that conquers fear, a king greater than any government." Those words stuck with me, even though I didn't understand them at the time. Over time, what had been Soviet communism gave way to state-controlled Islam. Mosques remained under surveillance, and anyone who spoke of a faith outside the official norm was seen as a threat. But what my grandmother planted in me was still alive. I just didn't know that one day it would change my life completely. At 17, I moved to Tashkent to study medicine. The capital was grand, full of modern buildings, but the atmosphere was heavy. There was always that feeling that someone was watching you. It was there, amidst the hustle and bustle of university, that I met other young people who, like me, felt an emptiness in their hearts, a hole that neither state religion nor ideology could fill. One afternoon, while searching for study materials in a library tucked away behind the college, I saw a group of students gathered in silence. I approached out of curiosity and realized they weren't reading medical books. They were reading something forbidden, the Bible, translated into Uzbek. One of the young men, named Rustam, looked at me and said in a calm, almost whispering voice, "Do you want to know the truth they're trying to hide from us?" That night, in a cold, damp basement, I heard the gospel for the first time. I heard about a Jesus who came not to impose, but to liberate, who did not condemn, but forgives. And it was as if everything my grandmother had said years before finally came to life before my eyes. It was there, in that darkness, that I found the light. But following Jesus in Uzbekistan comes at a price, and I soon discovered this in the most painful way possible. Jesus' words touched my soul like a melody from heaven. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." In that moment, everything my grandmother had whispered years ago finally made sense. Love greater than fear, power above all government. These weren't just pretty words. They were living, breathing truth, present right there with me. My surrender to Christ wasn't a dramatic event with tears or thunder. It was more like the sunrise, slow but transformative. Little by little, everything became clearer. The shadows of doubt dissipated, and something inside me awakened to new life. In the weeks that followed, Rustam helped me take my first steps in this faith. He taught me to pray sincerely, to read the Bible with a hunger for truth, and to live in a way that honored Jesus, even knowing that, in our country, this could cost us everything. He himself had been discipled by secret missionaries who had crossed Kyrgyzstan's borders to bring the light of the gospel here. These courageous men and women planted churches in basements, discipled in whispers, and loved a people they knew they might never see free. The love between Rustam and me grew in the same soil where our faith was planted, hidden but strong. We married quietly, in a simple ceremony, like two young people who seemed to be following the path society expected. On the outside, we were the model couple. He, a talented engineer, I, a future doctor. On the inside, we were secret Christians living in constant tension between faith and survival. The first years of our marriage were marked by this delicate dance. We went to mosques on Fridays, participated in religious festivals with the community, gave offerings, and knew the rituals. But it was all a facade. At home, we prayed to Jesus quietly, memorized verses for fear of being caught with Bibles, and dreamed of a day when we could worship without fear. And if you think being Christian is just a matter of believing, I want you to know, in places like Uzbekistan, faith isn't a tradition, it's a daily decision. Every morning, when we opened our eyes, We decided, anew, to follow Christ. And that was an act of courage, even if silent. But there came a time when we discovered that even courage has its limits, and that faith can cost more than you are prepared to lose. In 2019, I received the news that I was pregnant. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Rustam and I cried tears of joy that night, but along with the happiness came a cold fear, the kind you dare not even name. How would we raise this child? What kind of childhood would they have? What would happen if they discovered who we really were? Rustam had secured a stable job as an engineer for a state-owned construction company, and I worked as a nurse at Tashkent's Central Hospital. We made a point of being the best at everything, always discreet, always correct. We participated in community prayers, got involved in local events, and donated to fundraisers. Anyone would have described us as exemplary Muslims. But behind the scenes, the country's climate was changing. President Mirziyoyev had promoted reforms that deceived the world, appearing to signal a religious opening. But the reality was different. Control tightened. The SNB, the feared National Security Service, began a new campaign against unrecognized religious groups, which in practice included all Christians outside the Russian Orthodox Church. They called them destructive cults. But the truth? It was Christianity, simple, biblical, true, that they were hunting. The surveillance was terrifying. Every mosque had at least 2 informants, an official and an undercover. They observed who was absent, who was late, who whispered unusually. But it didn't stop there. Hospitals, schools, universities, state-owned companies, everyone was under surveillance. People disappeared overnight. No one talked about it, but everyone knew. And it was in this climate of fear that my daughter was born. Working as a nurse gave me a subtle advantage. I knew how to observe, and something in the hospital environment was changing. Colleagues who had previously spoken to me lightly began asking too many questions about the patients, their beliefs, their families. It all seemed innocent, like part of a casual conversation. But I knew better. This was covert surveillance. It was during the 5th month of my pregnancy that the news hit us like a bolt from the blue. Jamshid, one of our most beloved leaders of the underground church, had been arrested in a sudden raid on his home in Chilanzar. They took everything: Bibles, devotionals, even the list of names of those who attended the meetings, names of brothers and sisters who were now at risk. Fear spread among us faster than any virus. It was as if suddenly no one knew who to trust. For days, we wondered how it had happened. Jamshid was careful, discreet, experienced. The answer arrived weeks later, more cruel than we imagined. His own brother-in-law, Farid, had betrayed him. He was drowning in gambling debts, and the SNB used this against him. A trade, betrayal for freedom. That's when we understood. The persecution wouldn't just come from without. It would come from within. They were turning hunger, poverty, desperation into weapons against the church itself. A former SNB agent, who later managed to escape to Kazakhstan, revealed how it all worked. We don't need to infiltrate someone in every religious group. We just need to tighten the grip enough. When people's lives become unbearable, they turn everything over to us, even their own brothers. That was what was happening. A system designed to break ties, to use survival as a form of control. That night, after we learned of the betrayal, Rustam took my hand and placed it on my already swollen belly. "It's not just us now," he whispered. "We have to be even more careful." From then on, our meetings dwindled. They took place in alternating locations, in small groups, always with one person less than agreed, just in case. Our conversations began to use code. As a nurse, I suggested we use medical terms. If someone said they were having a heart checkup, it was a prayer meeting. A prenatal checkup meant a Bible study. We created our own secret language of spiritual survival. It was either that or absolute silence. The pressure mounted even more sharply when, one day, I was called to the hospital reception. 2 men in gray suits were waiting for me. They introduced themselves as representatives from the Ministry of Health, but anyone paying attention could recognize the SNB's traits. The scanning gaze, the cold tone behind the false cordiality. "Dr. Yusupova," the older man said, his smile tight and tight. "We've received reports of irregular activity here at the hospital. We hope that, as a loyal citizen, you can help us identify any suspicious behavior." His voice was low, but the message was loud and clear. We know something, or at least they want me to think they know. Only later did I understand the context. The hospital where I worked had been classified as a risk zone by the government. It was a diverse area, historically rich in cultures and beliefs. There were Orthodox Russians, Christian Koreans, many of them descendants of forced deportations during the Stalin era, and even a few Bukhari Jews. For a long time, this diversity was seen as a positive reflection of society. Now it was treated as a threat. The message was no longer subtle. They were tightening the noose. In the days that followed, everything seemed to have changed. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Smiles were shorter. Glances lingered a second longer than usual. Even close colleagues seemed to keep their distance. And amidst it all, my daughter grew inside me. Each week, it was as if the net around us tightened a little more. The Christian community was cornered. People disappeared. Others fell silent. It was like living in a storm where you didn't know where the next thunder would come from. The news grew more frightening by the week. Namangan, Andijan, Fergana, all these cities now bore the same trail of pain. Late-night arrests, violent interrogations, and empty accusations of religious extremism. It was no longer possible to pretend these were isolated cases. It was a deliberate strategy. I remember when we learned about Dilnosa, a Christian mother sentenced to 8 years in prison for corrupting minors with religious propaganda. What did she do? She sang Christian songs to her 5-year-old daughter. The world didn't hear her story, but we did, and that silenced us inside. In Andijan, another blow. 15 brothers were arrested after a family gathering. They were praying, nothing more. What they didn't know was that the son of one of the leaders, a teenager, had been recruited by the SNB after being caught vandalizing. They threatened him, promising freedom if he would just cooperate. And so, the cult became evidence, and the brothers, criminals. "This is no accident," Uzbek said one night during one of our last safe meetings, with the curtains drawn and the lights dimmed. "They've studied our patterns. They know how we move. This is silent warfare." Uzbek knew the system inside out. He had worked as a translator for international NGOs and understood how surveillance worked. What he described was not random repression, but the engineering of fear. One of those nights, as we prayed at home, Rustam held my hand tightly and looked at me with a seriousness that chilled me to the core. "Gulnara, if anything happens to me, if I'm taken, you must protect our baby. Promise me you'll do whatever it takes." His voice trailed off at the end, and in that look of his, I saw what I'd seen in the eyes of other brothers before they disappeared. A silent farewell, fear not for their own lives, but for those left behind. In the 7th month of pregnancy, the storm tightened. Uzbek, that same wise and faith-filled young man, was arrested as he was leaving work. There were no screams, no commotion, just 2 cars, a quick approach, and silence. That night, his wife, also named Dilnosa, arrived at our house, in tears, with the same swollen belly as mine. They took him. They said if I don't name names, he'll never come back. She trembled, and I hugged her, unsure of what to say. There were no words. What we learned later was even more terrifying. Uzbek had been followed for weeks. They knew his schedule, his routes, his contacts. They waited for the right moment, in public, in broad daylight, to send a message. They wanted us to see, Dilnosa wept. They wanted us to know that they can take whoever they want, whenever they want. From that day on, paranoia became part of our routine. Silence became a shield. Our meetings diminished even further. Some brothers cut off contact completely, fearing that any call or message would be their last. We began to destroy everything. We tore out and burned pages of the Bible, after memorizing them with all our hearts. John 14, Psalm 91, Romans 8. They became part of our flesh, hidden in the only prison they couldn't access, our memory. During the 8th month of pregnancy, something strange happened. I was on shift at the hospital, trying to feign normalcy amid the silent collapse around us, when Miriam, an older nurse who'd worked there for years, started chatting. At first I thought it was a friendly gesture, a gesture of affection toward her pregnant colleague, but I soon noticed a pattern in her questions. They always centered around family values. What do you believe is the meaning of life? What kind of song did your grandmother sing to you? It was subtle, but methodical, as if she were following a list. For a moment, I feared she was just another cog in the system. But there was something different. Her gaze lacked that calculated coldness I'd learned to recognize in the eyes of those who came from the SNB. On the contrary, when our eyes met, There was compassion. Not the forced, professional compassion of public servants. It was something else. It was real empathy, shared pain. And there, even without saying anything directly, I understood. Miriam also carried secrets. When Miriam touched on religious matters, there was something in her eyes that didn't suit the role of informant. It wasn't idle curiosity, nor calculated coldness. It was a look of understanding, as if, behind the words, she was searching for signs, but not to betray someone, perhaps to find someone, a soul similar to her own. I can't say for sure, but I believe Miriam also knew the pain of living hidden in her faith. The tension, however, reached a breaking point a week before my due date. I walked into the hospital locker room and found a folded pamphlet inside my locker. In red letters, the dangers of Christian sex in Uzbekistan. No name, no sender, but there was no need. The message was clear. They knew. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a warning. That night, Rustam and I made the hardest decision of our lives. If something happened to me during the birth, if I was arrested or interrogated, he wouldn't try to save me. He would run, take our daughter, seek refuge in the Kyrgyz embassy, and do whatever it took to protect her. I remember holding his hands and saying, "You have to choose her life, even if it costs me mine." But brother who hears me, even in this dark and cold valley, God's presence felt closer than ever. As if heaven itself had inclined its face toward us, we remember Jesus' words. "In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world." And those words were like oil on our wounds. We didn't know what was waiting for us, but we knew who would be with us. On a freezing January morning in 2020, the contractions began. Snow covered the streets of Tashkent like a blanket of silence, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Rustam helped me into the old Chevrolet Lacetti, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. He murmured prayers, as if each word could carve a path through the ice surrounding our destination. The Central State Hospital stands like a gray block of Soviet concrete, cold, imposing, impersonal. It had been the site of thousands of births, but never one as dangerous as this one. Upon entering, a grim-faced nurse took my documents with the indifference typical of the system. Without even looking up, she asked, "Religion?" "Islam." To answer. The word burned my mouth like acid. A lie told to protect my daughter's life. A lie only God could understand. I was directed to the third floor, where the strong smell of disinfectant couldn't hide the tense atmosphere. My roommate was a tired woman named Shoira, who had given birth to her third child 2 days earlier. She smiled gently and asked, "First time?" I nodded, but I couldn't say anything, because my fear came not just from the pain tearing through my body, but from the silent certainty that we were being watched. With each contraction, I closed my eyes and prayed, "Lord, protect my daughter. Lord, strengthen my body. Lord, do not let us be separated." Rustam held my hand, whispering words of encouragement, but his eyes were filled with the same fear that lived in my chest. It was during a routine exam that everything changed. Dr. Karimov entered the room. He was a tall man, with a neatly trimmed gray mustache, and a gaze that examined more than bodies. It seemed to see right through to souls. Beside him were 2 nurses I'd never seen before. He opened my chart, leafed through it slowly, and then looked up at me, his brows slightly furrowed. "Senior Yusupova," he said in a calm, almost rehearsed voice, "we need to talk. And I see you have no record of attending local mosques." Dr. Karimov's voice cut through the air like a blade. In Uzbekistan, this wasn't a casual observation. It was a veiled accusation. There, even his medical records carried information about his religiosity. Attendance at Friday prayers, participation in Muslim holidays, community involvement, all recorded. Not having this information was like walking around with a flashing light above your head. Something is wrong with this person. My heart froze. "Doctor," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the pain that was ripping through me in waves. "My husband and I are discreet about our faith. We like to live simply, in silence." He simply nodded with a slight raise of his eyebrow and made a quick note. The nurses beside him exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Something had already been decided there. I could feel it. The next few hours were a suffocating mix of physical pain and psychological tension. Every time someone new entered the room, be it a doctor, a nurse, or an assistant, I felt their eyes on me. They weren't looking at my condition, but at me as if I were a piece of evidence. as if they were just waiting for confirmation that would justify their already decided course of action. During a particularly strong contraction, the pain escaped through my mouth in the form of a prayer. Jesus, help me. It was no more than a whisper, a whimper. But Shoira, the woman in the next bed, heard it, and the change in her face was instantaneous. The compassion vanished, replaced by something between shock and fear. "Did you say Jesus?" he asked, in a low, trembling tone. I tried to talk her out of it. I smiled. I denied it. I said maybe she'd misunderstood, but it was no use. She didn't say anything else to me. She just pressed the call button, and, when a nurse came in, whispered something in her ear. The nurse hurried out, and I knew. They knew. Now, everyone knew. Soon after, Rustam was removed from the room. They said it was protocol. Male companions weren't allowed at that stage of labor. But I knew what that meant. They wanted to isolate me, set the stage for what was to come. The contractions came full force, and with them, a growing number of people in the room. But they weren't health professionals. They were uniformed men, cold-eyed, arms crossed, attentive. They were there not for my health, but to ensure the fulfillment of a sentence I didn't even know had already been written. And then, Serena was born. At 2:47 p.m. on that freezing January day, my daughter came into the world. She had her father's dark hair and my grandmother's almond-shaped eyes. She weighed just over 3 kilos, perfect in every detail. When I heard her cry for the first time, all fear vanished. For a moment. It was as if the sky had parted the curtain of pain and given me a glimpse of eternity. "My baby," I whispered, pressing her against my chest, my face bathed in tears. But that moment lasted less than 5 minutes. Dr. Karimov approached, this time accompanied by 2 men in dark suits. His SNB badge gleamed discreetly in his jacket pocket. The doctor didn't look at Serena. He looked only at me, with an expression of false formality. "Ms. Yusupova, according to confirmed information, you are involved in illegal religious practices. Under child protection law, your daughter will be held in state custody until her suitability as a mother is proven." For a second, I didn't understand. My body still ached, my mind numb. But then he reached out and tried to take it. "No!" I screamed with a strength I didn't even know I had. My voice came out as a roar, almost animalistic. "She's my daughter! She was just born!" The room filled with movement. The nurses approached as if in a cruel ballet, their faces set, their hands steady. The agents began reading a legal document, as if it could justify what they were about to do. "Minor Serena Yusupova has been identified as being at risk of extremist indoctrination." I grabbed my daughter with all my strength, but it was too late. They took her from my arms as she cried, her tiny fists fighting the frigid air that wasn't the warmth of my lap. I begged, screamed, pleaded as only a desperate mother can. "Please, please, at least let me breastfeed her. She's just a baby." But no one answered. The sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway, carrying my daughter away, was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard, as if each step stole a piece of my soul. Her screams slowly faded, and I stood there, alone, my arms empty, and my chest burning with pain. I stayed there, alone in the delivery room, my arms still stretched out, as if trying to grasp the air and pull back what had been ripped from me. The door closed, and with it, took away the most precious part of me. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Not the usual silence, but the kind that carries the weight of an absence that screams louder than any sound. "Brother, sister, listen to me. There are pains that have no name. Losing a child, especially like this, without a chance to fight, is like having your soul torn apart while still alive." At that moment, I truly understood Rachel's lament in the Bible, weeping for her children because they were no more, and she refused to be comforted. I was experiencing that grief, only with a beating heart and empty arms. The days that followed were a torture that wasn't limited to the body. It was something much deeper. My body, of course, needed to recover from childbirth, but what hurt most were my breasts, full of milk, throbbing for a daughter who wasn't there to be fed. Every drop was a cruel reminder that I was a mother, but I couldn't mother. The nurses offered me medication to stop my milk production. I refused. That was all I had left of Serena. It was the only physical connection that still connected me to my baby. The hospital room, which was supposed to be a place of recovery, became a disguised interrogation camp. Every day, men in suits and cold eyes appeared with folders, papers, and veiled threats. They spoke with the calm of those accustomed to crushing hearts. The most persistent of them was named Captain Alamov. "Sinra Yusupova," he said one day, slowly leafing through a form. "Your daughter is safe in a home under state protection. All it takes is a signature to get her back." The document required me to confess my involvement with radical Christian groups, name other brothers and sisters of the faith, and promise to raise my daughter in state Islam under official supervision. It was like selling my soul in exchange for the daughter God had given me. "It's simple," he said, with that same soulless smile. "You sign, you go home with your baby. You keep being so stubborn, and maybe she'll never know who her mother was." At another moment, trying to break what was left of my resistance, Alamov lit a cigarette, staring at me with cruel calm. "Do you know where she is now?" I shook my head, my heart racing. "Number 7 Children's Center, on the outskirts of town. It has food, beds, and appropriate religious instruction. There are 17 babies there, all separated from their parents for reasons like yours. The staff does what they can, but no staff member can replace a mother, right?" He said it as if he were commenting on the weather, but to me it was like ripping a bandage off a gaping wound. I imagined Serena alone, in a cold room without my lap, without my voice, not knowing that I loved her more than life itself. At night, the sounds of the maternity ward became instruments of emotional torture. Each newborn's cry pierced the walls and tore at what little peace I had left. I knew none of those cries were my daughter's, but each one felt like it. Shoira, the woman I shared the room with, left a few days later. Before leaving, she turned to me with narrowed, judgmental eyes. "This is what you get for betraying your culture, for abandoning your religion." Her words joined the swirl of accusatory voices inside my mind. Voices that said, "It was your fault. You knew the risk. You chose this path." But through it all, God was still there, quiet, steady, present. One of those dark mornings, I met someone who also knew this kind of pain. She was lying in the bed next to mine. She had given birth just 3 days after me, but her son had also been taken. They said it was for economic reasons, that she couldn't afford to raise him, but one look into her eyes was enough to tell the truth. She was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and like me, she was there because of her faith. We spoke only when shifts changed, in the silent early mornings when the hospital fell asleep. She whispered fearfully, always glancing at the door, as if any noise could mean another loss. "My husband was arrested last month. They caught him handing out flyers. Now they say I'm an unfit mother because I follow a foreign religion." It was like hearing myself speak in another voice. Her story was a parallel version of mine, and the suffering she carried I already knew. She told me they offered her a deal. If she renounced her faith and agreed to participate in Islamic re-education classes, she could see the baby once a week, like a prisoner visiting a relative behind bars. Her gaze, even dulled by pain, still held sparks of resistance, and I saw in it the same fire that burned, silently, within me. Rustam still came to see me, but our conversations took place under the watchful eyes of hospital and SNB staff. So we developed a code, a language of our own, where verses became diagnoses, and church news disguised as medical reports. "The tests remain positive," he said. This meant that no other brothers had been arrested. "Treatment is proceeding as planned," meant he was still at large, and trying to find a way to save us. On one of these visits, his voice sounded shakier than usual. "I've spoken to lawyers, international organizations, even people at the American embassy. They all say the same thing. Serena doesn't exist in the documents." Frozen, I listened, unable to respond. Officially, my daughter had been registered as premature, transferred to a specialized unit, and nothing more. No mention of state custody, no charges against me. It was as if my daughter had been erased with a stamp and a signature, and the state washed its hands. It was then that the visits from the psychiatrist, Dr. Nasira Sultanova, began. She was calm, methodical, gentle even, but her cold eyes revealed that her mission wasn't to help me, it was to deprogram me. "Gulnara," she said, in a sweet, controlled voice, "this religious obsession is compromising your stability as a mother. Don't you realize the harm you're doing to your daughter with these Western beliefs?" Sultanova was a product of the old Soviet school. She had studied in Moscow and mastered mind manipulation techniques that seemed designed precisely for moments like this. "Motherhood requires emotional balance," she explained, in that impersonal textbook tone. "And a woman who prioritizes dangerous beliefs over the safety of her own child cannot be considered balanced." She didn't just want me to change my mind. She wanted me to doubt myself. She wanted me to convince myself that my faith was a disease, and my motherhood a risk. With each new session, the questions became more personal, more invasive. It wasn't just about me. They wanted names, addresses, meeting places. They wanted details about the underground cults. They wanted me to denounce the brothers and sisters who were still free. "Think of your daughter," she said with false tenderness. "These early days are crucial. She needs stability. She needs a mother, not a martyr." The worst part was that his words had logic. Not truth, but logic. And that made them even more dangerous. It was a subtle torture, designed to wear down the soul. One of those nights, through my tears, I remembered my grandmother's soft voice, whispering in the dark when I was a child. "Little Gulnara, God's love is greater than any prison, and the name of Jesus is stronger than any regime." I didn't know what the next day would bring, but I knew I shouldn't, let go of Jesus' hand now. True love sometimes demands sacrifices that seem impossible to bear. In that moment, I realized that my pain wasn't just mine. It was part of a much larger spiritual struggle. Every moment of resistance, every silent tear, was an act of faith not only for me, but for my daughter, and for all the brothers and sisters who, like me, faced suffering in secret. Sundays were the hardest days. I knew it was the day Christians gathered for worship, and the pressure from the interrogators increased. Alimov, with his cruel smile, mocked, "Don't you miss your so-called extremist community? While you're here suffering, they carry on with their lives as normal." His words tried to plant doubts, sow resentment, and destabilize my faith. But I knew these tactics. They no longer reached me. Then, in one of these sessions, he brought me something that destroyed me inside. A recording, my daughter Serena crying. "Listen," he said, the sound of the little girl echoing through the room. "Your daughter is crying for you. The caregivers are doing their best, but she's rejecting the bottle. She's losing weight. Her stubbornness is starving her to death." 30 seconds of crying, a sound I knew well, that hungry moan I'd learned to recognize in our brief moments together right after giving birth. That recording was worth more than any physical torture or interrogation. "This can end today," Alimov whispered, putting away the device. "All it takes is your signature. Sign it, and tonight you can breastfeed your daughter at home." But the decision was not simple. The cost was enormous. In the 3rd week, an unexpected visitor arrived in my room, a woman dressed in traditional clothing, with a look that tried to appear maternal. She introduced herself as Gully Opa, a state social worker. "I speak as a mother to a mother," she said softly. "I have 5 children and 12 grandchildren. I know what a mother's love is." She showed me photos of my Serena, taken at the center where she was in state custody. Seeing my daughter in the arms of strangers, pale and thin, was like a knife to the heart. The cheeks I imagined were sunken. Her eyes were empty. One photo in particular broke me. Serena crying as a caregiver tried to bottle feed her. "She's well cared for," Gully Opa assured her, her voice a mix of compassion and cruel harshness. "But no caregiver can replace a mother's love. If you make the right choice," she continued, explaining that babies who stay at the center for more than 2 months begin to show signs of infantile depression. They stop crying, lose interest in food and the world around them. A condition psychologists call psychosocial failure to thrive. Initially, it can be reversed, but if it lasts too long. She didn't finish her sentence, but the message was clear. It was the most brutal form of emotional blackmail I had ever experienced, using a mother's love to try to rip away my faith. But in the midst of this nightmare, I experienced moments of grace that I can't fully explain. On silent nights in the hospital, when all seemed lost, I felt a gentle, calm, and strong presence beside me. A presence I couldn't see, but that gave me strength. Paul's words resonated within me, like a beacon in the darkness. "In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world." These words were my shield and my hope. I knew I was not alone. Jesus walked with me through that dark valley, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God. I didn't understand at the time how all that suffering could be part of a greater plan, but I had faith that God would never abandon his work. "Brother, listen to me. There are valleys of shadow where faith is all that remains." And it was there, in that profound silence, that God's presence became my only certainty. My greatest trial, however, was yet to come. and it would come from where I least expected. It was during my 4th week at the hospital that I met Maryam Karimova, a night shift nurse who, unbeknownst to me, would begin to change the course of my life. At first, she seemed like just another nurse among many, a middle-aged Uzbek woman, dressed in her impeccable uniform, discreet and efficient like most of the staff there. But there was something different about her, a softness in her eyes that clashed with the hardness I'd come to expect around me. On one of those long nights, when physical and emotional pain prevented me from sleeping, Maryam came over to check my vital signs. Instead of following the cold, mechanical routine I saw from other nurses, she sat in the chair next to my bed. "How are you really?" she asked, with a gentleness that surprised me. For a moment, I thought she felt my pain as if it were her own. I answered without thinking, revealing a sincerity I'd been hiding for weeks. Normally, I kept a mask on when facing that team, but something in Maryam's gaze made me let my guard down. She nodded slowly, as if she understood a suffering that words could not grasp. "Babies need their mothers," he whispered, glancing at the door to make sure no one else was listening. "It's a natural law, a law of God." The way he pronounced God took me by surprise. It wasn't the Allah I was used to hearing, but a more personal, closer God. Over the next few nights, Maryam spent more time with me during rounds. At first, our conversations were light, about my recovery and the weather. Gradually, she began asking questions that really touched me. "What kind of mother do you want to be?" she asked me one night. "What values do you want to pass on to your daughter?" My answers, unintentionally, were deeper than I imagined. I spoke about unconditional love, the importance of truth, and raising a child with courage and compassion. She listened to me with an attention I hadn't felt in weeks. "These are beautiful values," he murmured. "They come from the heart, not from government manuals." On a particularly difficult night, when the pain of separation overwhelmed me and I dreamed of my daughter, Maryam did something I will never forget. She made sure the hallway was empty, closed my bedroom door carefully, and sat down next to me on the bed. "Gulnara," he said softly, using my name for the first time. I know who you really are. I know why they took your baby away." My blood froze. It was what I feared most, a trap by the SNB, set to trap me, to extract confessions, to destroy my faith. But then something unexpected happened. She began to murmur softly, almost like a whispered prayer. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." It was Psalm 23, recited in Uzbek, with a pronunciation that could only have come from years of secret memorization, hidden from the world's scrutiny. My eyes filled with tears at that moment, when I realized that I was not alone. "Are you?" I started to ask, but she put a finger to her lips, asking for silence. "I've worked at this hospital for 15 years, he murmured. "I've seen so much injustice. So many children ripped from mothers who only wanted to love them, for political reasons, for extremism. Some of us here believe there are laws higher than those of the state." Over the following nights, Maryam gradually opened up, sharing her story with me. She grew up in a traditional Muslim family in Bukhara, but as a young woman she met Christian missionaries working underground in the markets of the old city. Her conversion happened gradually, just as mine did, and for years she lived a double life, a faithful nurse in a system that could punish her with imprisonment. "I've helped other mothers before you," she confessed in one of those bedside conversations. "Christian mothers, Jehovah's Witnesses, even some Muslims who converted and were punished for apostasy. The system is cruel, but God works even in the darkest places." These words fell like water in my desert, bringing hope to an almost dry soul. It was then that Maryam told me something that made my heart race. "I know where Serena is," he said, a gleam in his eye. "I work rotating shifts, and once a week I run the special care ward, where babies in state custody are kept. I saw her, Gulnara. She's beautiful and healthy, but she needs her mother." The possibility of seeing my daughter, even for a few minutes, rekindled a flame that I had feared was dying. "Is it possible?" I asked, almost without hope. "Yes, but it's risky," Maryam warned. "If we're discovered, we could pay dearly, but a mother has the right to see her child, no matter what the state says." The plan she devised was simple, but dangerous. On her next shift in the special care ward, in 3 days, she would take me there in the early morning hours, when surveillance was less frequent. I would say I needed medical attention for a postpartum complication, and it would only be for a few minutes to hold my daughter again. The next 3 days were a mixture of anxiety and fear. Each visit from the SNB was a torment. I feared our plan had been discovered. Throughout the day, Miriam maintained her professional demeanor, treating me like any other patient, without giving any clues as to what was to come. Finally, night arrived. At 2:30 in the morning, Miriam entered my room silently, pushing a wheelchair. "It's time," he whispered. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. She helped me sit up, covered me with a hospital blanket, and began pushing me down the dimly lit hallway. "If anyone asks, say you have complications and need immediate care," he warned softly. The journey through the hospital corridors was an eternity. Every step, every shadow, every noise made me hold my breath. Passing through there was like walking a tightrope between hope and disaster. Miriam walked through the hospital with the confidence of someone who knows every hallway, every guard, every blind spot of the security cameras. I followed her, my heart pounding, until we finally reached a discreet door marked in simple letters, "Specialized Neonatal Care, Authorized Personnel Only." She pulled out a card, and the door opened with a near-silent click. "Hurry," she whispered, pulling me inside. "We have about 10 minutes before the next round." The room was small, cold, and filled with incubators and medical equipment. But there, in the center of it all, rested my world, Serena. She slept peacefully, small and fragile, smaller than I remembered, but perfect, intact in her essence. My tears began to fall before I could even hold them back. Miriam softly encouraged me. "Go to her." Trembling, I rose from my wheelchair and approached. As I held her, I felt something long lost, a part of my soul, shattered and empty. Reconnect. Serena slowly opened her eyes, and in that instant, our souls met. It was as if she knew she was home, that I was the mother who would never abandon her. "Serena, Mommy's here," I whispered in her ear, as I rocked her with all the love in the world. In those moments, nothing else existed. Not the hospital, not the fears, not the threats from the SNB. Just me and my daughter, united by a love that no human force could break. Miriam glanced nervously at the door. "Gulnara, we need to go," she whispered, but I knew she understood how precious that moment was to me. I kissed my daughter's forehead, inhaled her sweet scent, and engraved every feature of her face in my heart. "I love you more than life itself," I promised, before returning her to her crib, my heart heavy. On the way back, each step seemed even harder. I was moving away from her again, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer just a desperate mother. I was a woman who had touched hope and decided to fight with all the strength God gave me. "Thank you, Miriam," I said, as I returned to bed, feeling the weight of the night, but also a new light within me. She smiled, a rare and sincere expression. "We are children of God, and we need to take care of each other," she replied simply. But that was just the first battle. If I really wanted my daughter back, we would need a bigger plan. In the days that followed, Miriam and I began to plot something far more daring than furtive visits, a plan that would require unwavering faith, the courage of a giant, and the mighty hand of God, the complete reunification of my family, no matter the cost. The plan she proposed seemed almost insane at first. "Gulnara," she told me quietly, "the only way to get Serena back for good is to get you out of here, out of this country. As long as you're here, they'll have power over you and your daughter." The truth hit me like a shock, terrifying, but impossible to deny. Meanwhile, outside, the world continued to turn. Rustam kept me informed, between visits and secrets. More brothers being arrested, underground churches being dismantled, a growing persecution against everything the government called foreign religious influences. But I had something they couldn't take away, faith, and with it, the strength to keep fighting. My case had become a symbol for the authorities, a cruel testament to the fact that not even motherhood was a shield for those who dared to defy the imposed religious order. I managed to connect with a network, Miriam confided to me one of those nights, as she carefully searched my room for possible wiretaps. There were Christians in Kyrgyzstan who helped religious refugees obtain false documents, safe transportation, and even asylum in Western countries. But for that to happen, Serena and I would have to leave the hospital together. At the same time, the logistics seemed impossible. I was under constant surveillance, and my daughter was locked in a high-security wing. Furthermore, Rustam would have to leave behind his job, his family, and the entire life we'd built in that country. "There is no other way," Miriam insisted. "I've seen so many families destroyed by this system. I won't let yours be another one." Over the next 2 weeks, everything began to fall into place, as if desperation had given new meaning to precision. Miriam found a loophole, the Friday night shift change. For exactly 15 minutes, supervision over the two of us would be reduced to a minimum. Rustam would be waiting in a trusty car in the back parking lot, ready to whisk us away. But there was something else she needed to tell me. The night before her escape, Miriam had whispered, almost like a prayer, "Once you cross the border into Kyrgyzstan, you can't return. The government will consider you a fugitive from the state. You'll have to leave behind your mother, your brothers, everything you know." Those words fell heavily on my chest, like stones that pile up without asking permission. But losing Serena forever was something I could never bear. That night, I knelt beside my bed, speaking to God in a way I hadn't since my conversion. "Lord," I whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if this plan is your will or just desperation pushing me, but I trust that you will not abandon us now." In my mind, Abraham's words resonated. He too had to leave his land and his family to follow God's promise. By the time Friday arrived, everything seemed so normal it was frightening. In the morning, the SNB interrogators came again, pressing me to renounce my faith. "This is your last chance," Captain Alamov growled, more impatient than threatening. "The state is tired of your stubbornness. If you only knew how close you are to getting what you truly want." He trailed off, letting the sentence hang in the air. At 10:30 p.m., Miriam appeared in the room, pushing her wheelchair. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with determination. "Are you ready?" she asked simply. I nodded, even though my heart was pounding so loudly it seemed to echo throughout the hospital. I only took the essentials, important documents, and a photo of my grandmother Vivan, who gave me strength. This time, the walk through the corridors wasn't a secret visit. Each step brought us closer to Serena, and closer to freedom, or utter ruin. There was no middle ground. Miriam knew every detail of that hospital like the back of her hand. The guards' exact schedules, the camera routes, even the patterns of the nightly cleaning rounds. When we finally reached the special care ward, my chest tightened and my breath became shallow. Serena lay awake in her crib, seemingly knowing something momentous was about to happen. With trembling hands, I picked her up and wrapped her in the blanket Miriam had brought with me. "This is your chance for freedom, my love," I whispered in her ear, trying to contain my emotion. "Let's go home. Not the home we know, but a place where we can finally be together." Miriam had already prepared a stroller, modified with a secret compartment at the bottom, where she had hidden the medicines and supplies we would need during the journey. "If anyone asks," she murmured as she placed Serena in the stroller, "we'll tell them we're taking the baby for urgent tests at radiology." She had even falsified the necessary medical prescriptions, putting not only her freedom, but even her own life at risk. The hallway to the hospital's rear exit seemed to stretch on forever. Every sound, the cold hum of fluorescent lights, the distant beep of monitors, even the sound of our footsteps, felt like a warning sign, a summons to impending danger. But somehow God was with us. We passed no one along the way. In the parking lot, Rustam was waiting for us in a Toyota Corolla borrowed from a fellow believer. When he saw us, his face lit up with tears he couldn't hold back. "Is she here?" he asked, his voice breaking. I lifted Serena so I could see her, and for a moment we stood there, the three of us, embracing in the chill of the Tashkent night, a family that, against all odds, was together again. I looked at Miriam, my savior, and said, "Come with us. You can't stay here after this." But she shook her head, sadness in her eyes. "My place is here," she replied firmly. "There are other mothers who will need help. Other babies will be ripped from their families unjustly. Someone must stay to bring light to this dark place." The journey to the Kyrgyz border consumed the entire night. We drove along back roads, avoiding the strictest checkpoints, stopping only to feed Serena and change her diaper. With each kilometer we left Tashkent behind, I felt an invisible weight lift from my shoulders. But I knew, deep down, that I was closing a chapter of my life forever. At dawn, we finally reached the Sirdarya River, which marks the border between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, in a remote and silent region. Miriam's contacts were waiting for us there, a Kyrgyz family who had already helped dozens of religious refugees find freedom. "Welcome," the patriarch said, speaking simple, broken Russian. "Here you are safe. Here you can worship God without fear." Crossing the river was the most dangerous moment of the entire escape. We waded through icy waters that reached my knees, with Serena cuddled against my chest. Rustam carried our few belongings balanced on his head, while I prayed with every step, asking God not to trip over the current. When I finally touched Kyrgyz soil, I couldn't contain myself. I fell to my knees, overcome with profound gratitude. "Thank you, Lord," I whispered, tears streaming down my weary face. "You have freed us from the house of slavery." Serena, as if understanding the weight of that moment, looked at me with her large, dark eyes, and then smiled for the first time since she was born. It was as if she knew we were finally free. The months that followed were spent rebuilding, adapting, and healing. We lived in a refugee shelter in Bishkek while we waited for our asylum application to be approved in the United States. On Sundays, we could go to church without fear, something that felt like a miracle after years of hidden faith and whispered prayers. Serena grew up healthy, surrounded by a community that celebrated her life, rather than seeing it as a threat. Brother who listens to me, today we live in freedom in the United States. Here, Serena can know Jesus without fear, without the burden of persecution. But my heart still goes out to the mothers left behind in Uzbekistan, silently fighting against a system that sees maternal love as a weakness to be controlled, rather than the most powerful force God created. I pray for Miriam, the one who risked everything to reunite our family, and for all the professionals who keep compassion alive, even when it's forbidden. My story isn't just about persecution, pain, and escape. It's above all a living testament that God's love can overcome even the most rigid and oppressive structures. When they tried to use my motherhood to break me, they discovered that my faith and my love for Serena come from the same divine source, and that neither can be separated or destroyed. If you're going through your own battle, struggling to maintain faith amid pressure and fear, I tell you, there's no separation so deep that God can't restore it. There's no terrible system that can defeat the power of His guided love. And for those who live in religious freedom today, I ask that you not forget mothers like me, those who still face silence, fear, and injustice, waiting for the day when they can embrace their children without fear of the world around them. This is not just my story. It is the story of thousands of women whose voices have been silenced by governments that fear the transformative power of maternal love fueled by faith. May God find us faithful in defending the most vulnerable until His justice reigns throughout the earth. For a mother's love, guided by faith in Christ, is stronger than any earthly tyranny.